Well, my name is Brian McLaren. I was born in upstate New York, a little town called Olean. I lived in Illinois as a child, back in another part of New York, but spent most of my life in the Washington, D.C. area in Maryland. And for the last 15 years, I lived in Southwest Florida. I was born way out in the country in upstate New York. My dad was a doctor in public health. So his work focused on rabies and hoof and mouth disease and things like that. And so that gave me a love for nature from my youngest years. We were a very conservative Christian family. Fundamentalist would have fit the kind of religious framework of my childhood. Fundamentalist groups are usually very tight-knit and very warm and very intense in their commitment. And you know, in many ways, those are assets when you're growing up. There are liabilities, too, that you often experience when you grow up fundamentalist, or at least some of us do.
And what were the early messages about spirituality or faith?
The fundamentalist Christianity that I grew up in was really focused on sin. So spirituality was in many ways sin avoidance and sin management. How to make sure you're forgiven for what you've done that's wrong. And so the sense that your life was being scrutinized by God at every moment. And there was both the sense that I was loved by God, but also it would be easy to get in trouble. A little bit like having a very strict parent. And I was a firstborn child. I wanted to do what was right, so I paid attention, and I was a good student in school and a good student at church. I learned what I was supposed to learn. I think by the time I was 10, 11, 12, I started thinking there were going to be problems for me, largely because I loved science. And like a lot of boys that age, I loved learning about dinosaurs and trees and oceans. And I really found evolution to be intriguing. It made so much sense to me. And I knew that in my church, we were not allowed to believe in evolution. So in many ways, my spirituality became kind of two-track. What I knew that my religious community expected and desired, and what I knew I couldn't go along with. So I was going to have to kind of find my own path. Well, a moment for me really occurred somewhere 12, 13, maybe even 14 years old. But I remember I must have asked a question in my Sunday school class about evolution, because I remember my teacher, who was he wasn't a super well-educated guy, but he was a sincere guy. I mean, anybody who volunteers to be Sunday school teacher for middle school kids, you know, they've got some nice bones in their body. And I just remember him saying, you have to make a choice. You can either believe in God or in evolution. And I remember thinking, okay, 4, 5, 6 years and I'm out of here. I have to go along with this while I'm a kid. But when I'm older, I'm going to have some different future. So I really would have expected I would have become kind of an anti-religious person in many ways. But then, not too long after that, I was 14, turning 15. Some of my neighbors invited me on a retreat, and a youth retreat. Well, we didn't have really anything like that in my religious background. So I went on this retreat and had a really transformative spiritual experience where something happened to me that really set me on a different course. And so the Saturday afternoon of the retreat, they took maybe an hour or maybe even 2 hours. And they sent us all off on our own. And they just said, find a place and talk to God. Well, I sort of knew about saying prayers, saying a prayer before a meal or saying prayer before going to bed at night, or the kind of prayers that were said at church. But the idea of just going and talking to God certainly wasn't a real part of my life. And I went and climbed up in a tree, and it wasn't a especially spiritual feeling because there were ants crawling all over me and mosquitoes and everything else. But I remember very sincerely saying, what do I really want in life? And I remember I prayed, I hope that I will experience the most beautiful sights and sounds. I hope I will experience the most beautiful feelings. And if I can experience that, I think the word beautiful was the word for me that afternoon. If I could experience that, I would be satisfied. And I basically said, I hope, God, if you're there, that's something I could experience. And there wasn't anything very profound that happened, but it was a very sincere, I think in some ways it was my first prayer where I was saying what's really down inside of me. What do I really want? And then later that night, they had a program, and at the end of the night, we all went back to our cabins, and a few friends of mine and I had arranged to sneak out of our cabins and meet. We weren't planning any mischief. We just wanted to hang out. So we went out on this hillside, and I think there were 4 or 5 of us. For some reason, I pulled away from the others. I went back, and I remember sort of lying back in the grass, looking up in the stars. It was a beautiful, clear night. And I remember having the sense that whatever God was in the beauty of the stars and in the awesome vastness of space. And I just had this feeling that I was loved, and that whatever God was love, and that I was loved. And I remember having this feeling that every star was loved, and that every blade of grass, and that the trees, and there were cows in a field on the other side of some barbed wire. And I just remember feeling every single thing is loved, and I'm part of this thing, that I'm loved. And I started to cry. I actually was a little bit afraid. I thought, am I having like a mental breakdown? It wasn't stress or anything bad. It was wonderful, but it was just this feeling that was so big. I thought I might explode. I remember praying, whatever's happening, I can't take much more of this. But it was this just feeling of the immensity of love and beauty and wonder and depth in life. And I got up, I was over by myself and went and sat down by my friends who were talking. And I'd been away from them for 20 minutes maybe. And we were, in high school, and we were thinking about leaving school to go on with our lives. And when I came and sat by my friends, they were saying these things that we never said to each other. It was a couple guys, a couple girls, but they were saying like, I love you guys. I love you. And I'd never heard my friends say anything like that to each other before. And I just remember feeling at that moment, just the tears came back. I couldn't talk to them because I just felt the beauty of what was happening. And I felt whatever I had prayed earlier in the afternoon, I remember thinking, maybe I'm going to die now because everything I asked for, I've already experienced. I did feel that something changed. I mean, this sounds very simple to say, but of course, being brought up fundamentalist, you're brought up to believe that you're supposed to be good. And I remember having this feeling, I'm supposed to be good. I really wish I didn't have to. I don't really want to. But I remember after that, it was like something flipped, like, I really would like to be a loving person. I would really like to be, I probably wouldn't have said a spiritual person, but a person of depth and a person of compassion. All of those things felt like what I wanted, it just was like the conflicted parts of me got a little more aligned. Well, I probably would say it differently now than I would have said it then, just because I kind of can see how the whole process unfolded. But one way to say it would be that the notion of God as supreme being that had all kinds of patriarchy wrapped up with it. It had an understanding of omnipotence, meaning absolute control. So many of those things that were baked into the definition of God in conventional Christianity, and many streams of Judaism and Islam as well. I was bumping up against real problems with those. Problems logically, problems bumping them up against experience. You know, when you're 12 or 15 or 17 years old, you haven't experienced enough of the world yet that you think that, well, you say, boy, there are hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people for thousands of years who believe these things. Who am I to question them? You question them, but you don't really think you have the right to question them. And very often your religious leaders are telling you you don't have the right to question them. But I think part of what happened through suffering, part of what happened through my experience of being a pastor, is I felt I not only have the right to question them, I will be a dishonest person if I don't question, if I don't follow the questions that I need to ask to where they lead me. So really it was the notion of God, conventional notions of God that were central to it. When you grow up fundamentalist, you also are given ideas like that the Bible is inerrant or infallible, that it is inspired in a way that you have to agree with all of it. And so all those are wrapped up, I think, in one big package. Well, when you already have status and all of the benefits of belonging in a group, and now you're shaking some of those things, that the social threat of rejection makes the doubt of perplexity weighty. It's a weighty decision. If I change my view on this, I won't belong with the people who I belonged with. And so there's this process of saying, am I willing to risk rejection, to be honest with what I actually think? And some people would say, well, of course, you just be honest. But I don't think, people who say that, I don't think have ever been part of a high control, high commitment religious group. And one of the things that happened to me in those years is I would try to let out in my sermons and conversations with people in my congregation that I was asking these questions. And I felt I was on an edge and I could very easily go too far and get fired. And different people would come and leave the church. They'd say, I think you're liberal or something like that. It's one of the worst words you could be called. But one of the members of our little leadership team, we were about to go away on a little leadership retreat for planning and so on. And before the retreat, he said, hey, Brian, I want to put something on the agenda for the retreat. I said, what's that? He said, you're on a journey, man. He said, you're asking questions. He says, we have to decide, is this your journey or is this our journey? And I think, I remember I said to him, hey, let's not get into this retreat. We got a heavy agenda. He said, well, we'll see. So at the retreat, he brings it up. And I was nervous because I thought if we get this issue on the table, it could really cause a kind of schism in the group. But to my surprise, our whole leadership group, which this was maybe 20, 25 people, they basically said, no, this is not just your journey, this is our journey. We're with you on this. Well, what that did is it gave me permission. It gave me a kind of freedom to then try to bring others along with me on that search. And what it allowed me to do is to look outside of our evangelical heritage to try to find understandings of God that were bigger and had more room. And because of the nature of the change that I was going through and that many of us were going through, it's not like we had this old notion of God that we needed to get rid of and replace it with the new perfect version of God. It was that we'd lost confidence that anybody had the one perfect version of God. And what we needed was to be in a posture of openness and humility and receptivity and curiosity, that we were on a search for an ever-evolving understanding of and relationship with and experience of God. That included openness to the other, and it also included going deeper into our own selves to say, well, if there is some sense that God is in me and is part of me, and what's happening in me that I need to pay attention to. So what it felt like is our little congregation in fits and starts got permission to go on that journey together. I feel it's harder for me to talk about that than it's ever been, because so much of the language that I want to use feels like it's so weaponized and so set in stone that it's one of the reasons why I've come to value contemplative practice of silence so much, because for me to be in the presence of God, which for me is the presence of love and peace and joy and all the rest, the experience of that is what matters most to me, and the words to define it are a bigger challenge for me now, because I just feel if any time I use the word God, for so many people, an old man on a big throne with a long white beard, who's some mix of Yahweh or Jehovah from the Hebrew scriptures and Thor from Norse mythology. I mean, just this amalgamation of Zeus and you know, the idea of theos in Greek philosophy. It's all amalgamated. So I suppose what I'd want to say is that I think God is what and who we encounter when we go to the depths of life, to the depths of ourselves, to the depths of connection with others, to the depths of nature, to the depths of physics. We come to this place where there's mystery and awe and wonder and a desire to worship and a sense of connectedness. And so, in many ways, a good word for that is love. That God is the love that we experience in our loves for everything, whether it's love for one another, love for the beauty of a particular tree, or for the mathematical, precision of an equation. It's the same love and light and goodness, and it's not separate from creation. It's infused and expresses itself in all creation. I have a good friend who was on a very similar journey to me, and he came out sort of publicly as an atheist. And he said, "Brian, you think a lot like I do. Why don't you just come out? You're a coward." And I said to him, "No, I think I reject what you reject. But I don't think we solve the problems of our human existence, I don't think we solve all of our problems by rejecting any notion of God or any language of God or any search for these deeper mysteries and connections in life. Like we solve one set of religious problems, but we have another whole set of problems of what it means to be human beings that I think that's where we will find God in a deeper way. So my movement through perplexity into what I call harmony, where I come to sense that ultimately we're all connected. Ultimately, in the New Testament, it says God will be all and in all. That this sense that God is in all and that we're in God, and this deep sense. To me, this whole process takes me deeper into that sense of sacredness. But ironically, what that means is that my friend who's an atheist, I don't want to argue with him, and I don't necessarily want to convert him to think the way I do. I think he is trying to solve his problems in the best way that he can. And it makes perfect sense to me why he wants to do that. And I think, if I can say it this way, I thank God for atheists, meaning that I think atheists play a super important role. And so what I believe God to be is shown in atheists as well.
Does that crystallize for you into a specific message that you have for people?
Well, I think one way to say it is I think that the spiritual call is a realization that we need to change our way of life. We need to change our relationship with the earth, our relationship with each other, our relationship with ourselves. And I think that's what changing our relationship with God involves. It's when you change, if we understand God to be the love that loves everything, we change our relationship with God and we then want to be in harmony with that love. And so my message is we all have a lot of problems. This person needs a better job. This person needs a better marriage. This person, whatever. We all have these issues we're struggling with. But in the big picture, we need a new relationship with reality, starting with the earth and each other and ourselves and with God.